Okay, afternoon everyone. Welcome to our third session today as we move to proceed quickly as we can along the book of Daniel. And we want to focus extensively, if you will, on the prophecies. We talked a lot over the last 2 weeks about the Middle East. We talked about the geography of the region and how things work. And now we are moving into a space where we want to talk a little bit about some of the stories that have occurred. And I told you last week that Daniel is divided into narratives and prophetic sections. So before we get into today's session, I want us to just pray for a bit. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for being able to do this presentation today and being able to study your word. As we study, Lord, we pray that we'll really understand the messages you have in store for us. Is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, so let's get going. I would want to use the screen again today, and that is our primary focus, if you will. We use the slides, and I think by now everybody is familiar with the rules. We will monitor the YouTube between Tyrese and myself. We'll keep looking at the YouTube and have a sense of what is going on there. And then as we go forward, we will certainly take any questions that will come from the Q&A using Zoom. And then along the way, I will stop at the slide from time to time and ask if there are any questions. So I think we are all okay. We have a significant number of participants so far. We have 20 people on Zoom and 13 people on YouTube. And I think it's time for us to get going and kind of see where we can end up today. So today, we continue this focus on God has a plan, which has been our focus throughout the session. This is our overriding theme, if you will, as we go through the various sections of the scriptures. And that is what we want to use as our focus today, right? So that is, yeah, my bad. That is what we will use as we go forward, all right? In terms of today's session, we are looking at lesson 3, which is escape from a fiery furnace. And we really want to talk a little bit about the narrative story that occurs here in the scripture. And before we do that, however, we want to review some key points as we've been doing for the past 2 weeks, if you will. So the first key point that we want to establish is that a lot of what we're discussing occurs around the Middle Eastern area of the world, the Middle East as we call it today. And it's where Iraq and Iran and Syria and some of the other nations are. But a lot of it will also cover Northern Africa, Egypt, Libya, etc., and Europe, which is kind of where our theater is as we deal with these many various areas. And what we are seeing is that these are historically very deep and rich legacy areas. These are areas where in the past people would have had many different civilizations. And if you can trace even back to the Garden of Eden, one could argue, as indeed has been argued, that a lot of civilization would have started in this area. So that is fundamentally our area of theater. If you expand it a bit, we talked about the Assyrian kingdoms, which were before Daniel time. And these Assyrians would have captured various areas of the Middle East. We see Israel and Judea here. We see Egypt, and we see what is today, if I go back to the previous slide, modern day Iraq and Iran would have been places that they would have captured, but not a lot of the European nations, which was still by the Greeks and the different nations, etc. When we discuss this whole conversation around prophecies, we used a categorization that came from another author that spoke about classical versus end time or apocalyptic prophecies, right? And I thought that maybe that is what created some concern about predestination. So I want to talk a bit about that today. So we said that classical prophecies are the prophecies that we had from people like Isaiah and Jeremiah, and I gave you a very good example of a classical prophet, which was the prophet Jonah. So Jonah was a prophet who was sent to the city of Nineveh, and they were supposed to be, his message from God was that God will destroy the city Nineveh, right? That was his message. But of course, the message said that it is because of their wickedness, and if the people repent of their ways, God is calling them to repent, or he will destroy the city. Of course, Jonah, given his own history as a Jew living in these Assyrian nations, would have emphasized more the destruction than the repentance. Nonetheless, the people heard him, and it's important to know that when the people heard him, they made amends and they repented of their sins. And because they repented, God no longer destroyed the city of Nineveh. So it was a conditional prophecy that focused on communicating God's word at the time, and that it depended upon how the people responded. I think that is fundamental to what we are. Now, when we get to the apocalyptic prophecies, I'm suggesting that those are primarily the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. And when I say unconditional, I suspect that that is where it's at. And I was thinking about that a little bit and asking myself, how can we clarify this issue of unconditional? And it's important to say that, last week, because of the information and how it's been flowing in the country over the last few weeks, I was very clear that we would have an update from the Ministry of Health every day last week. That is my prophecy. It doesn't mean that it was predestined that the Minister of Health will come every day, but I could reasonably conclude from what I saw that he will come every day. Lo and behold, on Thursday, there was no Ministry of Health press briefing, but rather there was a post-cabinet press briefing that occurred later in the day at 2 o'clock. Does that mean that I am not a good prophet? It simply meant that the things would have changed, but on an average, on a general way, I could reasonably say that there would be an update from the Ministry of Health each day. I'm saying that to say that when we review the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, God gives us a review of world history. He gives us very general outlines. He's trying not always to be too specific, even though later on in Daniel chapter 11 and chapter 10, we end up reviewing some very specific events. But the fact is, God gives a general overview of world history, and he kind of says, this is how things will happen. We will have to, a lot of times, prophecy is interpreted after the fact. So when we look back at prophecy, we could say, Greece really fit the description given in Daniel chapter 2. Or we could say that Babylon, well, that one, like I told you in some of the Babylonian, in the Daniel prophecies, God is very clear. God said, you are the head of gold. And then later on, when we get to Daniel chapter 7, God will be very clear about what the other kingdoms represent. So the point is that when we do apocalyptic prophecies or prophecies about the future, and the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation, it's important to realize that these are prophecies that are pointing towards the end of time and when Christ will eventually come, all throughout history, right? And we'll talk about that in a bit. So it is important to see that what we are getting is a general sweep of world history and God's intervention in world history. And that really is not dependent on whether people are good or obey him, etc. He's kind of saying, this is how the world will evolve over time. All right? So that is, I thought I'd just spend some time there because I realized that when we got the questions around predestination, it may have found its genesis in the way we classify classical and apocalyptic prophecies, right? So they display God's plan for the nations, and it doesn't really matter on the response or attitude of the people involved in them. As we went along as well, we also said that there were 4 ways in which we could interpret prophecies. And we said that they are preterism, futurism, and idealism. And by now you are extremely versed on this, so I don't have to spend a lot of time going through it. But preterism kind of assumes that everything has already happened in the past, and therefore we don't need to worry about what the Bible says now. Futurism is the opposite of that. It assumes that everything will happen way down in the future. We don't need to worry about that now. Idealism says these are just nice stories that are representing good and evil, and they're not really specific in their own nature. Historism, which is where we really land as a people and as a nation as we study Bible prophecy in today's world. Historism says that the prophecies are unfolding from the time of the prophet who receives the prophecy all the way to the end of time, and God will come a second time and the world comes to an end. And that is the approach that we would like to land on, and the one that we think is important. I could stop here again and just take any questions, but if there are none, we can move on. I think we have covered this before, but really I'm just making sure that we're all on the same page. Any questions, anybody? Great. So let's keep going. The other thing to realize is that we talked a little bit about the nature and the context of the book of Daniel. And one of the things we said was that Daniel chapter 2 to 7 were written in Aramaic, which was really an international language at the time, as opposed to Hebrew. And that there's a sort of parallel structure that occurs between chapters 2 and 7. And in that parallel structure, I said to you that there was first the vision of the empires, which is what we studied last week, Daniel chapter 2, where we studied about Greek and Babylon and Rome and Europe, etc. And we said that that is repeated, if you will, in Daniel chapter 7. So that is the first parallel. There's a second parallel, which we'll start today, which says that God delivers some people from a fiery furnace. And that is parallel, if you will, in Daniel chapter 6, which shows that God delivers Daniel from a lion's den. So similar circumstances are occurring, and they both emphasizing the same principle, which is God delivers, and God is able to protect, all right? And then when we get to Daniel chapter 4, which we do next week, we will look at the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is judged by God, and Belshazzar is also judged by God in Daniel chapter 5. So this is sort of a mirror. Again, we've gone through this before, and a lot of you are very, very conversant with this, and some of you can go ahead and tell others about this and explain it to them in real detail, because you've been in the Cochrane SD Bible class now for 2 weeks, right? That's great. And let's keep going. The other things I told you about the book of Daniel is that there is a certain amount there are certain amount of narratives or stories. So I saw somebody raise to Tyrese. Okay, you know what the back is, so no question. Right, yeah, so let's keep going. So there are some narratives, which are stories. So the first one is, of course, refusing the king's diet. We talked about that before. So that is a story, which is in Daniel chapter 1. In Daniel chapter 2, we talk about trying to figure out a dream. Then in Daniel chapter 3, which we are studying today, we talk about surviving a fiery furnace. Then there's the story of the Mad King. This is not Game of Thrones, it's in the Bible. The Mad King in chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, we will see about the handwriting on the wall and the destruction of Babylon with Belshazzar as king. And in Daniel chapter 6, this is one of the more popular stories that we tell to our kids at church. This is about surviving the lion's den, right? So this is how we have seen things in the past. Any questions on this? Any questions, anybody? Tyrese, you have a hand raised? I'm not sure if you have a question. Well, we need to talk. Anything?
Yeah, you hearing me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yeah, well, concerning the previous slide, like, why is there a need for the parallels.
Or
Like
there's
why
no
say I
need.
need
There's no need for it. This is really an observation. In other words, what we are observing is this is kind of literature. We are observing that the book of Daniel is written in the way older literature was written, which is a high degree of repetition. If you read some of the Psalms written by King David in the book of Psalms, there's a similar literary style where he attempts to repeat things over and over again, if only to emphasize. So that what we are seeing in Daniel here is that it is not so much a need as it is a style, where it is that God is using the same method where he repeats what he said one place in another place, if only to emphasize the importance of the message. So in Daniel chapter 2, you got a vision of the empires. In Daniel chapter 7, you have another vision of the empires, but a little bit more detail. So God is using repetition. The Bible, we should say, is using repetition as a means of emphasizing truths. And that is not unique. Sometimes you talk to people and you say the same thing in different ways over and over again, just to make sure that they get the understanding of what you are talking about. And this is a similar approach that is practiced here today. So it's really, remember, they didn't have TV, they don't have internet, they don't have books that they could walk around with. So the fact that these visions and prophecies and stories are repeated more than once re-emphasizes the importance of the principle that is being purported here. So for instance, today we will certainly talk about God protecting his people in times of trouble and in times of persecution if they remain faithful to him. And the same thing is being emphasized when we get to chapter 6, which is with Daniel the lions, that as opposed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God is also preparing and protecting his people during times of trouble and torment. Everybody okay with that? Darius, you okay with that?
Yeah.
You're good? Yes? All right, great. So he's answered and he's okay. Let's keep going. And that's good. Right, so we also have, again, this is one observation. We've observed that in the literary style of the book, there seems to be a number of narratives or stories that have occurred. And then there seems to be sections of the book that are dedicated to prophetic parts, if you will, right? And that to me is extremely important. So once we understand that, I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that we are now in the narrative side of the book. But I want to awaken your curiosity a little bit and suggest to you that these stories are not just here for their how to put it, the drama and the attractiveness of the event and the thriller around it. I want to suggest that in some of these narratives, we can gain deep insight that helps us in the prophetic part. And that for us is clear because at today's session on surviving a fiery furnace, I am suggesting to you today that that is more than just a story about 3 boys surviving a fire. There is something deeper here that is aligned to prophetic interpretation later down the road, right? So that's just something you need to keep aware of and keep your palates wet and your concern about and see how you would want to do that. All right, so let's keep going again. The other thing is to note that when we get to Daniel chapter 10 and to 12, we have a number of stories of warring nations and then a heavenly champion. So it's all already narrative and prophetic. And again, this is just being very loose as a categorization. I'm not trying to be very precise here because I could argue within my own mind that chapter 3 can very well find itself within a narrative and a prophetic section. So your challenge as we go along today is to figure out what is the prophetic aspect of this chapter that we are studying, which is why I've devoted a whole session just to look at it on its own today, right? So let's keep going. We then looked at the main themes of chapter 1, and we said that the main theme was that God is always in control. Even when Israel was captured as a nation and given over to Babylon, so it looked like things are really bad with them. Daniel chapter 1 verse 2 begins with a very important phrase that says, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judea, into his hand, into Babylon's hand, with some of the articles of the house. In other words, when you think that God is not in control and things are difficult, it's important to remember that even when they were in captivity, God was still in control of the destiny of the children of Israel. And I want to suggest to us, brethren, that that is a key point today, because as we go through our activities today, it's important to realize that even in difficult circumstances today, where things are not really happening the way we would like, with corona and losing of jobs, etc., God is still in control. And the challenge is, do we have the faith to believe that, notwithstanding how we feel in our own bodies and what is happening? And that is the challenge. Can I trust God even when things are bad and even when things are not happening the way I would like it to, right? And that is something we need to keep in our minds as we go forward. So the other thing is that we established that the Jews, in making that trek, would have made a significant terrestrial trek to move from Judea all the way to Babylon, and that Nebuchadnezzar would have made this journey 3 times over different periods, number of years. And in each time he captured more and more of the Judean empire until they were eventually totally exiled. We then said that Babylon, in that period in which it existed, would have been heavily focused in what is modern-day Iraq, if you will, covering parts of Syria and as far down south as Egypt. So Babylon was not, and even had parts of Turkey that exist today. So Babylon was not just a simple dynasty. It was indeed a very powerful dynasty that controlled large swaths of land in the Middle East, and quite rightfully could be referred to as a kingdom that ruled the world, because in that place, for them, this was the domineering culture, the Babylonian culture. Again, I emphasize, just for balance, that it doesn't mean that there weren't other nations existing in the world, whether in Africa, in India, in China, etc., even in the West, in the American Indians, etc. But given the relationship to Bible narratives and prophecies and instructions to God's people, the focus of the Bible is around who control this area, which is predominantly where God's people were established with the expectation that they would have spread his message throughout the whole world, and the whole world would have been blessed because of the Israelites. We know the stories that they didn't conform to that, and God eventually had to come himself and die for us and spread the message through each and every one of us today. All right? Again, I wanted to keep in mind that this is key to the little nugget I raised with you a while ago, which is that sometimes we find that there's a prophetic interpretation to what is being said. And it's important to recognize that if we know Babylon, then we will begin to understand. So let me just deal with that very quickly. The fact of the matter is that when we get into Revelation, whenever we get to that in terms of time, the book of Revelation builds heavily on Old Testament writings and Old Testament events, including this period when Babylon ruled the world. So I want to suggest to you that if we understand the characteristics of Babylon when they were in control, then later on in Revelation, when the Apostle John uses the term Babylon to represent kingdoms in a different time, we begin to understand that he is building on characteristics that we would have seen during this period. So we said that Babylon was famed for its magnificence, its luxury, and its own religion and beliefs and its own laws. Let's not forget that. Babylon had its own religion. As a matter of fact, Babylon had a number of gods that they would worship. Some of them had different names. And one of the most important things I could say to you now, and we'll come back to it a little bit later, is that the Babylonians had their own numbering system. Their numbering system, today we use a numbering system that is basically a decimal system and is based on 10 and multiples of 10. So we go from 1 to 9 and then we say 10 and then we go all the way to 100 and thousands and tens of thousands.
Where's that?
Hello? Somebody is having background noise. Whitewash should have. Tyrese, that was you? Okay, he's muted. All right, let's keep going. Right, so the fact is, in Babylon, however, they use a numbering system based on 60. It's called sexagesima, right? So it's really based on 60. So they will count all the way from 1 to 59. And then when they got to 60, they will restart all over again, right? So their numbering system is 60, and then it would be 120, etc. Now, you might find that that sounds strange, but think about it. It's not so strange because today we use that. We count time in a numbering system based on 60. We said 60 seconds make 1 minute and 60 minutes make 1 hour. We also use that 60 base system when we talk about a circle. We say a circle, we teach that in our schools, and our engineers and mathematicians know that a circle has 360 degrees. That is also based on a numbering system that anchors as 60 as the base. Now, interestingly, Babylon is the nation that made this a way of counting. So let me be clear, there were other civilizations before the Babylonians who used 60 as a base of counting and would count to 60. But Babylon, if you read the history books of the numbering system, Babylon turned it into what is called a positional system. So today, if I saw a number that says 121, you would assume that there is 100, there are 2 tens making up 20, and then there's 1 unit making up the 121. In the case of Babylon, they were the ones who also use a similar approach. But if you use that in their approach, it would mean that the 1 would be 60 times 3, which is 60 to the 3rd. And then the second one would be 60 times 2, which is 120. And then the last one would be units only. So by making it positional, Babylon basically owned the numbering system 60. Why is that important? Why am I talking about what seems to be an abstract thing? When we come later on and try to understand why this is important in terms of prophecy, we'll understand that, right? Importantly as well, Babylon, Mervyn Maxwell says in the book God Cares, Babylon had a god called Arun. So they will always associate numbers with their gods. And Arun was a god who they associated with the number 60. So Babylon not only built magnificent temples and edifices, etc., but Babylon had their own religion, which of course would have been contrary to the religion of the Hebrews, who believe in a theocracy, a monotheocracy, one God as opposed to the many gods that the other nations had around them, and that they would have believed that that God was Jehovah or Yahweh who would guide them. The important point to note is that whenever Babylon captured a nation, it also converted the nation. And we talk about that in a little bit, right? So it's important to know that Babylon was seen as a place where the gods will enter earth. So all of that was part of their heathen religion, but it was their religion, and it was a religion that was based on multiple gods, multi-theism, plenty different gods. The gods had numbers, and that they based their numbering system on the sexagesimal system, which was based on the number 60. That's extremely important as we go forward, right? So the other thing we said last week and week before was that Babylon like to capture and convert, and we have a good example of that with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their names, Daniel, Shadrach, Daniel, Mishael, etc., were Jewish names that was supposed to remind them about God. In this case, he changed Daniel's name from Daniel to Belshazzar, which is, of course, related to one of his gods. He changed Hananiah and Shadrach to Shadrach, and Mishael to Meshach, and Azariah to Abednego, right? So, in a way, the Nebuchadnezzar is practicing brainwashing and mental conversion. And more than that, he has the power of the state that says that if you don't conform, then he would enslave you, he would make you his prisoner, etc. So that he changed where they lived, he changed their names, he changed their education, he changed their diet. But what this doesn't say is that he had the force of the kingdom to make it happen. So you could argue that while Nebuchadnezzar had magicians and astrologers and sorcerers who would do some of his religious work, he himself ran the country as a state. And from time to time, he would want to make sure that what he did was aligned to the gods, because Nebuchadnezzar was very proud, and he was suffering from hubris, which is a really inflated sense of his importance. And he wanted to really live for eternity. That was something that was always preoccupying Nebuchadnezzar. Again, we're still in review, so we're moving along quickly. We studied last week that because of his concern for the future, Nebuchadnezzar went to bed feeling very concerned about what will happen. And in that regard, God gave him a vision. Now, the Bible was very clear that said he saw a vision of a man. I want us to be very clear about that, right? That what he saw was an image of a man who was what we like to call a metallic man. And he is made up of a head of gold, a breast and arms of silver, the chest, the belly and the thighs of brass, the feet of iron, the legs, sorry, of iron, and then the feet of iron and clay, right? This is important. That is what he saw. And we said that we went through all of this last week, so let's just review that it was really a vision of the succession of nations that will dominate that Middle Eastern area until Christ comes. And this was Babylon, the Medes and the Persians by Cyrus, who was their first lead, but there were many kings inside of there. And I answered a question from Pastor last week that I just want to emphasize, that there were many kings inside of Babylon, not only Nebuchadnezzar, there was Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather, there was Belshazzar, who eventually, and then in the Medes and the Persians, there were Darius and Cyrus, etc. The Greeks, they started off with Alexander the Great, and then later on, he would be succeeded by 4 of his generals. And the Romans are an interesting feature of history. The Romans adopted something called a Senate and tried to run the nations through a parliament in most cases. But after the death of Julius Caesar, etc., and Brutus and all that, we found that the Romans moved into a mixture of imperialism, where you had a king or somebody who will control in full and complete domination. But there were still sections of Rome that were managed by a Senate, right? And that is important to appreciate. And then subsequent to Rome's demise after the 5th century, some people say that Rome would have really lived until around as a homogeneous monolithic nation until about 476 AD. So around the 5th century or so, Rome started to break apart. There were invaders, some different barbaric tribes, etc. And over time, Rome still exists today as a city in Italy and as its own nation through the Vatican, etc. But the fact of the matter is that Europe has become divided. So there is some iron that exists, but there are many other nations, and they all live together as a divided European place, right? And there is no political union that brings them all together. This is just another look at the same thing. It basically says Babylon, there are the times in which they live. I told you, don't worry yourself too much about that. But again, the representation of gold, silver, bronze, iron. I told you as well that if we were to consider the image, when you went from the head to the feet, you went through metals that were of lower value, but of greater strength. All right, and that is extremely important. So what you found was that the nations of the world were deteriorating in terms of their values, their morality, their whatever, but their political systems were gaining strength until we have what we have today. All right? And then this last one I wanted to use was to remind you that this is what I was talking about earlier. You notice that they are imperial provinces. This is all the Roman Empire. So anything in green here are those who give full allegiance to the emperor. But there were some states that still maintain senatorial occupation. So they had senates running them from time to time. This is around 111 AD. So this it's not static. Rome was a dynamic nation and it will change from time to time. I'm seeing a question that came up on YouTube where someone is asking, why did Babylon convert their captives? But the fact is that Nebuchadnezzar understood that he could not, on a day-to-day basis, be sure that everybody will do what he wanted them to do. So the best way to deal with that was to create disciples. And so if he could convert the people to his way, and they followed his way, then he had less of a need, if you will, to try to manage them and micromanage them. If all of us followed the directives of the government and the Ministry of Health, there had been no roadblock on the road yesterday. That is a good example, right? The reason that we have to have a roadblock is and people have to say how they're going to cool out their head in Carnage. A man's going and sell a dog, considered to be an essential service. That is because people are naturally disobedient. So Nebuchadnezzar understood that, and Babylon understood that. And they knew that for them to have control, they needed to convert. Again, that is not unique to that period. There are many examples today, as recent as today, where people are doing the same thing, where they are allowing, they are controlling the captives that they have. Mr. Map, you have a question?
Yeah, good day. My question was that you said in the statue, right? As you go down, it would have greater strength, and as you go down as well, it would have lower values and morality in the kingdoms, right?
Yes.
But I mean, to me now, I don't find like it adding up because you would say that Babylon had greater morality than Europe now. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, understand, and that's a good question. So I would concede on that. So I'm saying that really and he's going back to the view I had here that says that as you went down, they had greater strength, but not necessarily the same sort of value. So they may have had different values in terms of their morality and stuff, and morality is just one aspect of it. What I'm really gathering here is that as a nation, in terms of their dominance and the way they would want to control people, a lot of that strengthened, if you will, as you went through these different kingdoms. So Rome, for instance, may not have been doing some of the immoral things, but the way Rome structured themselves and destroyed and killed people, and when people went through the catacombs and persecution, etc., from that value perspective and that morality perspective, they were to some extent even worse than Babylon. And then today we find that we seem to be in a very good place in terms of human rights, etc. But maybe as we get into Revelation, we'll realize that that will not always remain the case. So that is the qualification, if you will, I will put to my synopsis that the value diminishes as you go down. So that even if today it looks as if it is in a more stable place, I am assuring you that when we look at the prophecies to come, it is suggesting that there will be a greater attempt at diminishing human rights and people's individual responsibilities, etc. Let's be clear, right? So that is what I'm saying. Yeah?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, great. All right. So let's keep going. One of the things that came out of the vision of the image was that we are told that the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof is sure, right? So that was a good thing. But we were told that in the days of those kings, we'll set up another kingdom. So this was all part of that dream in chapter 2 that Nebuchadnezzar himself had. And that is extremely important. This was not somebody telling Nebuchadnezzar, well, you know, this is what God says. He got a dream himself. So he was concerned about the future, and God answered him. And he got a vision that says, there'll be nations that will come after you, but eventually all of that will be destroyed, and God will set up his permanent kingdom. So every nation that is represented here are transient in nature. They may look like if they're lasting for a long time, but they are soon succeeded one way or the other through the timeline of history by another nation. What the prophecies are suggesting is that eventually the only permanent kingdom we will have is the kingdom of God. And that is what is important to note. So that was a message that was planted firmly on Nebuchadnezzar's mind, that the only permanent kingdom would be the kingdom of God. Which God is this? Well, this is the God of Daniel, because it was Daniel's God who interpreted the dream for him. And Nebuchadnezzar himself will later testify that the God of Daniel is the God of all gods. So he understood that what he was experiencing in this vision was the God of heaven, the God of Daniel, indicating to him that as a God, he will set up a permanent kingdom that would last forever. So if Nebuchadnezzar was worshiping other gods, he would have some sort of dissonance in his head, because the other gods he's worshiping cannot claim that they would last forever or set up a kingdom of his own that will last forever. What this almighty God is suggesting, and God has proven himself, because when nobody could remember the dream, the God of Daniel remembered the dream. So Nebuchadnezzar was in awe. He was astounded that this God could recall the dream. And then when he recalled the dream, he gave an interpretation that suggested that Nebuchadnezzar's time was finite as opposed to infinite, and that it will soon end. Now that is, for a period of time, Nebuchadnezzar would have been living in awe of that whole thing. But as time went on and everybody walking around and calling him king and bigging him up and saying he's such a powerful God, etc., after a while it started to get to his head. And Nebuchadnezzar's spirit is troubled because he don't like the fact that his kingdom will not last forever. So if he has to change that, he feels he needs supernatural power to change that. Everybody appreciating the plot that is developing here? There is a vision he gets from the God of Daniel that says, your kingdom will be succeeded by other kingdoms, and eventually all the kingdoms of the world will be destroyed, and the kingdom of God will last forever. He says, wow. And then as time passes on, he says, I am not happy with this, and I would really like my kingdom to last forever. But who do I turn to make that happen? I can go through the political apparatus, but I'm already the king, so I don't need to do that. So the only other thing I could do is control the heavens and the earth, and therefore I could go to my gods. But my gods don't seem to have the power that Daniel God has. He cannot go to Daniel God because Daniel God already told him that his kingdom will be destroyed and that it will be represented by this stone that will last forever. So Nebuchadnezzar then starts to fashion in his mind, how can he get his kingdom to last forever? And which of his gods should he turn to that will allow him to last forever? And if you keep that dilemma in your mind, then you begin to appreciate why chapter 3 is happening, because you begin to understand what is most likely happening in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar the king when we get to chapter 3. All right, we did a timeline last week and we simply said that if we simply use it to scale, then we could see that Media Persia, Greece and Rome would have been occurring around this period here, just before and after the birth of Christ, but there's still a lot to go and there's a lot that happened before, which we deliberately bypass as we go forward. So let's go to this story. So I told you just now that Nebuchadnezzar having a change of heart. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 47, the king answered Daniel and said, of a truth, it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal the secret. Daniel 2:47. So at this stage, Nebuchadnezzar is in awe of Jehovah Yahweh. He thinks God of heaven is the best thing since sliced bread. He wants to serve him, but he is troubled. There's something that is tugging at him in his own hubris that is tugging at him that says, why can't my kingdom last forever? So Nebuchadnezzar moves from that place to this place. In Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 to 7, I didn't put the whole thing here, but I'll just read through quickly. And you can read that as you should in preparing for the lesson for next week and for this week. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was how many cubits? 70 cubits. A score is 20, so 70 is 60. I spent some time before telling you that the Babylonians were advocates of a sexagesimal system where 60 was their base number. I also said to you that Mervyn Maxwell told us very clearly in God Cares chapter 1, God Cares 1, that one of the Babylonian gods was a god called Arun, who also was designated, because they love to use numbers to designate their deities, who was designated by the number 60. So if the king is concerned about his future, and he's concerned about what will happen to him down the road, but he would like Babylon to last forever. And when we get to next week and we talk about the king's testimony and his pride, we realize that this is a recurring theme at Babylon, because Nebuchadnezzar is obsessed with his own sense of importance and his own sense of power. And that's why, brethren, it is not good for us to develop selfish tendencies. The more we think about ourselves, then the less likely we are to help others and to focus on doing good for others. Because in his attempt to do that, he found himself in that situation, right? So I have some questions that come on YouTube and they're asking, did Nebuchadnezzar believe by aligning himself with Daniel's God will make his kingdom last forever? And did Nebuchadnezzar know Daniel's God? So I think we are answering those two questions here. Clearly, after the vision of chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar knew Daniel's God. He was giving him praise. He elevated Daniel to a higher office because he says, your God is a powerful God. And for some time, it seems, between chapters 2 and 3, it seems as if he continued to give Daniel's God all prominence and praise. When we get to Daniel chapter 3, however, he is making an image whose height is 70 cubits, and the breadth thereof is 6. So this number 6 and 60 is reoccurring again. These are the numbering system of Babylon. This is the numbering system of Babylon, right? So that's important. And he sets it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together, and you know the story, all the official public servants and members of state. Now that's extremely important. I didn't add it in here because I didn't want to fill up this slide with the names, but if you read chapter 3 verses 1 to 7, every possible government ruler is mentioned here. So he has the officials, he has the sheriffs, he has those who run provinces, etc. So Nebuchadnezzar is basically saying, and then what does he call them to do? He calls them and he says, and worship the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So here was a king who is taking the power of the state and he is bringing it in union with religion, the religion of his heathen god, and he's asking everybody, including his political leaders, to worship this god. Now that is, I can't see that as clear anymore, any clearer than that, right? Here is a Babylon. So here is a Babylon system where the king of Babylon is uniting with a false religion, the religion of his god called Arun. He is building an image to his god made up of 6 dimensions. He's using 60 dimensions. So the height is 60, which is about 100 feet in the air. And the width is also 6 cubits, right? Because a cubit was their unit of measure as far as length was concerned. A cubit is about, some writers tell you 18 inches, but really a cubit for the Babylonians was the length between, I think, the elbow and the thumb or the hand or something. So it's more about 19 inches. So this 60 cubit image is really 100 feet in the air. And then he made it, in its width is also about 6 cubits. So this is a large golden image that is standing on a plane, which means that everybody who is on this flat plane can see the image from wherever and from whatever distance. So Nebuchadnezzar, I'm repeating it again for good measure. Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar is making an image to his god called Arun. The image is made up of dimensions and numbers that is of Babylon, his own nation and his own system of measurement. And he expects everybody in the nation to worship it. That's extremely important, including the religious people and the non-religious people, because once he have asked to assemble, so I can even bring that up just to make sure we're all on the same page. Yeah? So let me just read the chapters, because I feel as if I want to make that point, right? So then Nebuchadnezzar, verse 2 says, Nebuchadnezzar king set together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, you know we had sheriffs in Babylon, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now, I want to make a point here that I know is extremely important. Every time we talk about this image that Nebuchadnezzar built, everybody, I can take that off now and come back to our slide. Everybody who represents this image in prophecy represents it as an image of a man. Let me just say that there is nothing in the description of Daniel chapter 1 verse 1, chapter 3 verse 1 that suggests that this was the image of a man, just as an image. Some have made a very strong conclusion it was an image of a man, and that's fine, and that's what we have been seeing it. And when I come to the other slides, I will also continue to represent it that way. But I'm saying to you that I think it's important to recognize that while the previous dream, we are told that it was a vision of a man. In this thing, all he says is that he made an image. So it is something that would have represented his 60 god, which is the god Arun. and he expects everybody to worship that image. It is made of pure gold because gold is representative of Babylon. And if he is concerned about living forever, then that is extremely important. I think I've hit some key points here that you need to just soak in. And if you have any questions at this stage before I move on, I will take it, because this is extremely important in grasping that this is not just another story. Everybody okay? You don't need to answer me. If you're okay, we will just continue on, right? If you have a question, just raise your hand in the presentation or add it into the chat on the YouTube and we pick it up. So let's keep going. So it seems as if, let me just take a comment here quickly. All right, so everybody seems to be okay, right? So it seems as if Nebuchadnezzar required proof of his government officials' loyalty. Now again, Maxwell is suggesting that there was a period where Nebuchadnezzar experienced some mutiny within his camp, and therefore it was important for him to ensure everybody was loyal. Let me take a question from Ron. Ron, we allow you to talk.
All right, hoping you could hear me.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm hearing you.
So, just a comment, it's not really a question, because I remember reading the story, and one of my thoughts was, did Nebuchadnezzar really think he would really live forever? And thinking that what you just said, that was mainly his actions for building, well, not mainly, but one of his actions for building the image was he was told his kingdom will end. He wanted to make sure he had loyal subjects, and that's why it was only leaders who called. He didn't, and it was really at the time too. Remember, Babylon was ruling the whole world, so it was a world event where all the world leaders had to come and bow down. And
yes,
in that way, he was humbling them, making them. The persons who stood up in that session would obviously be the traitors in his mind.
yes,
Would obviously be the place where he would find some kind of mutiny and he could get rid of them.
yes.
You know. And just on a side note, I often use that in my own mind as perceiving why Daniel wasn't called to bow. Because there was no question Daniel was second in command to Nebuchadnezzar. And he knew in his heart
Yes.
Daniel was not a traitor.
Yes.
And the kingdom of Babylon didn't end with Nebuchadnezzar, it ended with his son.
Yes.
You know, so he successfully humbled his subjects with that activity, right? And I see too that I'm not jumping ahead of you. I see too that if this is an antitype of what's supposed to happen in the end, right?
Yes.
There may be a situation where the world has to see that people are loyal. They wouldn't have COVID parties. I just using that as an example. And it's how would we know the mind of a person? They would have to illustrate it in some form of worship, or at least split some kind of allegiance. And this is where these laws may call some Bible-believing Christians not to oblige to the law. You know, and they might end up looking like traitors when they aren't really, but they may look like to the Nebuchadnezzar of the time.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Ron. I think those are very, very good contributions to this, right? So if I were to summarize what he's saying, he's basically saying that while Nebuchadnezzar would have been concerned about his own mortality and the fact that he would die, he wanted to make sure that his followers and his subjects were loyal to him. That was one. And that they would also, even if they were to continue, they would follow what he wanted. And in truth and in fact, Maxwell talks about that in God Cares. There seemed to have been some treachery that was occurring within his ranks. And therefore he was concerned that he had to demonstrate the loyalty of his officials by guarding them on the plain of Dura. So another important thing that you said, which is a big mystery for everybody, is why Daniel is not mentioned in this narrative. And in truth and in fact, it seems as if Daniel was not there. Some have speculated, as indeed Ron just did, that Nebuchadnezzar would have deliberately kept Daniel out of this because he knew that Daniel would not bow down anyway. Or maybe he didn't cater for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The other thing to note is that And I saw another comment coming in about whether or not the other Israelites were there. And my quick response to that would be to say yes. So that this plain of Dura would not just be the government officials and stuff, but it will really ask all the people to come and worship in front of this image. On top of that, Nebuchadnezzar took more than just Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from Israel and placed them in government positions. So it looks as if some of the remnant, I use that word deliberately, some of the remnant of Israel who were now in Babylon and under Babylonian subjection, rather than remaining faithful, would have also conceded and worshipped the God that Nebuchadnezzar would have established. All right, so those are two key points that we just want to continue, and I really appreciate the input with respect to that. So he asked him to worship the golden statue, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were faithful subjects of the king. However, so I want us to appreciate that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and even Daniel, worked hard for the state when they were asked to work hard for the state. But when it comes to obeying God took precedence over working hard for the state. And I want us to remember that, brethren. I want to remember that not in the way you expect. I wanted to remember in the way that to say that when we go out there as Christians and believers to work in the world, our work ethic must reflect the fact that we are servants of God. So a lot of times we cannot afford to be lax and not giving up our best as everybody else, because we are really reflective of a powerful God and a God who is in control of our lives, right? So once Nebuchadnezzar's requirements clashed with the requirements of God, however, they decided to remain faithful to God and their faith, even if they will be killed for that. Now remember that they were told that they would be thrown in the fiery furnace. So this was not just, and I will come to that in a bit, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just asking for obedience, he was forcing the obedience upon the people. He was basically saying, if you really want to continue living in Babylon, then you have to follow this. Now, obviously, there's a mix of people in our group. There are some people who are worshippers of the same God that Nebuchadnezzar is worshiping, and therefore they will merrily and willingly bow down to the image. And then there are those who just simply, maybe they are treated. So there are those who just simply don't care and say it really don't matter whether we bow down or not. We gotta live here, let me just bow down, right? So they are doing it not necessarily from a mental place, but because it's the rule of the law. And then there are those who are out of straight fear, are saying here now, I cannot bow down to this, I cannot not bow down to this image because I've been put to death and my life is more important than anything else. Thank God there's a fourth group led by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who says, we really don't care if we are destroyed and our bodies are burnt, we will serve God come what may. And that I think is really exemplary. So Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. I told you again, image of gold. Again, I'm using this representation of a man, but nothing suggests that. Now, Nimrod founded Babylon with the intention of building a long-lasting kingdom, right? So this question of longevity and infinite rule of Babylon is not new. It wasn't just something that Nebuchadnezzar had. It seems that all the Babylonian leaders walked around with this view that their kingdom could last forever, right? So Daniel bear witness of God. So some people are asking, did Nebuchadnezzar know the God of Daniel? Of course he did, because when he appeared before Nebuchadnezzar, he testified that his vision came, the secret came from God, right? So he built a golden statue to proclaim that his kingdom would be an everlasting kingdom. And I thought I should just leave you with these question marks because, like I told you, I need to be clear. Is this an image of a man, or is it just a geometrical statue that has 100 feet high by 6 feet wide? I don't know what the depth was, right? But that was the dimensions we get, but we know 60 corresponds to one of the Babylonian gods. So clearly he is making some errors. So again, I am following the whole construct by keeping this as an image of a man, although I don't necessarily accept that I'm convicted in my heart that it wasn't necessarily an image of a man, right? But it was an image anyway, something that was 100 feet high and 6 feet wide, 6 cubits wide. And it really represented, it was about 9 feet wide, and it really represented all gold, which was really meant to be the forever aspect of the kingdom. The important thing to note though is that there was an atmosphere of worship. So that is important to realize that that's why I said to you earlier that Nebuchadnezzar is marrying the powers of the state with religious power and religious culture. So that in doing that, he's creating a union, my word, I'm deliberately introducing that word now. He's creating a union of church and state. He's saying that if the church and the church's beliefs and the church's culture and the church's mechanisms are united with the political strength of the nation, then that united entity, if you will, that he will now govern, because he's the supreme leader, is one that could command people to do what they want. And that is important there, because today, when we talk about religious liberty in the world, we cherish the separation of church and state. That is touted all over the world, United Nations, etc. But understand that in older civilizations, that was not a guaranteed thing. And therefore, the separation of church and state that we accept today is not the same that occurred in those days. And certainly in Babylon, at first they started off that way. And then soon they found that there was a uniting of church and state, right? So the worshiping crowd bowed down before the magnificent statue. This says 90 feet, I tell you more like 100, while the melodious instrumental music was playing. So there is a kind of Pavlov, you know, Pavlov was the German psychologist in his early days of developing conditional reflexes, and he talked about the fact that when he had the dog, he gave the dog a piece of meat, and the dog ate it, and then while the dog was eating, every time he gave him the meat, he would ring a bell, and then after a few times, he would not give him the meat, but just ring the bell, and the dog would salivate because he was associating the bell with food. Similarly, Nebuchadnezzar was attempting by saying, when you hear the song of the music and the harp and the psaltery, he's associating the music, which was cultural to the place, with worshiping the image. So that's an important truth that is emerging, that it seems as if when Babylon attempts to force worship, they also use cultural norms to encourage forced worship. And if you're taking notes, there's a note you should kind of keep close to you. All right, so they obviously had to face the test of fire. I want to just focus on the responses of the 3 Hebrew boys, right? So they said, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. They were not questioning that. They were not unsure about that. They were clear in their hearts that God could deliver them from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But then they said, but if not, let it be known unto you, O king, that we do not serve your gods. So this is why I'm telling you that that image is representative of his God, right? Nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up, which was really representative of the God of Babylon. So here is Babylon making an image, and the image was really meant to represent the larger God of Babylon. I mean, when you get to Revelation, if you remember this, then a lot of what we will uncover in Revelation becomes much easier to understand. Because when it makes reference to Babylon, it is making reference to this behavior where we believe that we can force worship, and that we can force worship using cultural norms, music, etc. And that if you do not do it, you will be destroyed, or you will be ostracized, or you will not considered. So I have a question here. It says, how Oh, somebody's asking how it isn't a man if the statue is described as having body parts. I don't know that I saw in Daniel chapter 3 any representation of body parts. In Daniel chapter 2, it is represented as body parts. So that's what I'm saying. I want to be clear that in my head, Daniel chapter 2, God gave an image of a man, breast and arms, etc. In Daniel chapter 3, all we are told is that Nebuchadnezzar built an image that is of 60 cubits and 6 cubits wide, right? So I hope that answers that question. I'm going along with the general accepted approach everybody takes that says it's an image of a man, but I'm just telling you that there's not a lot of support for that in the scriptures. Right, so again, one other person is representing the fact that the image is in the dimensions of 60. And because he just joined, I can say to him clearly that we went through that to say that the Babylonian numbering system was based on 60, which is just like we use today with time, 60 seconds, 1 minute, 60 minutes, 1 hour. And that it seems as if Nebuchadnezzar was making a god, making an image to his god that would represent his god, and that image was made with a numbering system that is intrinsically a Babylonian numbering system. I could use another term which you are familiar with from Revelation that says the image of a man, all right? The number of a man. But that we will come to that later down the road. That is the Babylonian numbering system. So the point I want to make in this one though is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a faith that is interesting because it is not what I like to refer to, and those of you in Cochrane know me well, as prosperity religion. You see, prosperity religion says that if I serve God, everything will be all right. And then God will always account for me. These guys haven't adopted that. They are saying it is quite possible that God will allow us to die. But even if he allows us to die, we will still serve him. And I want to challenge you to say that that is powerful in terms of a testimony. Because I don't know how many of us have that conviction to say that we will serve God even when things are bad, even when we lose our jobs, even when our families are in distress, even when we are sick and we have been diagnosed with cancer and look like there is no hope and we will die. Will we still serve God? And that is what these guys way back then in 605 BC, these guys are demonstrating that they are willing to serve God even if he may not save them. In this case, God delivers them. But there are many times later down the road where when we went through the Dark Ages period and Christians were thrown as martyrs to the stake and burnt and to lions, etc. Some of them went singing the hymns as they went, but they were dying. So I want us to appreciate that serving God is not a covering that says you will never go through bad times. You can very well be going through bad times while you serve God, but God protects us and he delivers us. And the fact is, this world is not our home. We are really preparing for something else that will come, right? So the behavior of the young men could not have gone unnoticed because their enemies had started to accuse them. So I want us to appreciate that there's another dimension occurring here. Not only are the young men sign up for God when everything else is asking for them to do it, but there are people who will accuse them of not signing up for God, which is important to appreciate, right? So they are always willing accusers. The king gave them a second chance, not wanting to destroy them. So he gave them a second chance. I would think that this is a real temptation. I oftentimes like to say that we are not tempted to do what we cannot do. We are tempted to do what we can do. So the fact is, God doesn't tempt me to fly from here to Port of Spain because I cannot fly from here to Port of Spain. But he will tempt me to go out the road even though it have COVID and just go out for non-essential items because I can't do that. So this was another opportunity for these guys to back away. So the king came to them and said, look, when I heat up the furnace 7 times, I don't know how we could have done that. There's another that defies the physics, but we could deal with that as a separate issue one day. And if you don't do what I expect of you, I'm going to show you, you have one more chance. I'm going to song the music and stuff one more time, and then you have a chance to decide what you would do, right? These guys found themselves with another opportunity to serve the king of Babylon, but they didn't. And so it's important to realize that even when they had multiple opportunities, they still remained faithful to God. So when they were thrown in, we know the story, I don't need to get into that. When it was thrown in, the men who threw them in, they were burnt, etc. But when Nebuchadnezzar looked inside, he saw 4 persons as opposed to 3. And he was able to almost, some people asked, did Nebuchadnezzar know the king, the god of Babylon? He was the one who said, this looks like the Son of Man. I saw a raise hand. Sum up.
Yeah, so my question is, after Nebuchadnezzar knew that God existed through Daniel, right?
Yes.
Wouldn't it have made sense for him to respect the beliefs of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
That's an interesting question. So really he's saying if Nebuchadnezzar believed in the God of Daniel, he should have respected the beliefs. And I'm saying to you, that's why I spent a lot of time earlier, saying to you that over time, Nebuchadnezzar seems to be progressing. He's struggling with his humanity because he's reaching to the point where he accepts Daniel's God as a powerful God, but he's obsessed with his own hubris. He wants to live forever. And so over time, he forgets. He doesn't pay attention to. And it seems as if God is, I love God. God is always trying to remind us that he's the most powerful being. And if COVID-19 doesn't remind you that God is in charge, I don't know what will. Because in a short space of time, a microbe that we cannot see have caused the whole world to stop, which is really saying that this is just to indicate the power of nature. That's what some people call it. I like to call it the power of God. So here it is that Nebuchadnezzar is making these accusations. But when he throws the guys into the fire, 4 of them are now in the fire as opposed to 3. The 4th one is Jesus Christ himself. And Nebuchadnezzar, when they bring them out, they don't even smell fire, which I find interesting. God is such a deliverer that he preserves them to the point where they do not represent the character of the tribulation they went through. That's important. Eh? I can't help but remind you of one of my heroes, which is Nelson Mandela, right? So Nelson Mandela went into jail in South Africa for 26 years. But when he came out, he was still monogamous, he was still loving, he was still wanting to find equal representation for the whites as well as the blacks. So he did not take on the characteristic of his place of tribulation. He was in a jail, he was beaten, he was persecuted, he was asked to do manual labor, his guards made all kind of noise about him and his race and used racial epithets, etc. When Nelson Mandela came out, that is what makes him such a powerful statesman. He did not adopt the culture and the language of his tribulation, but rather he maintained what he believed and continued to live as a statesman until his death. That is an example of what we're seeing here, which are these guys didn't even smell fire because they were, meaning they didn't have the scent of fire with them because they were really not, they were not being influenced by the tribulation. They were being faithful to the God of heaven above. And that's a powerful, powerful message. Let's move on. I asked you from the very beginning, is this just a narrative or is there any prophetic value to this story? There's a word I like that is popular in today's society called revisionist. Some people talk about revisionist history. There are some people who, and that happened, this year we are celebrating 50 years of the Black Power movement that occurred in Trinidad in the 1970s. And when I saw Rafik Shah writing about it and some of the others were in the heart of the battle. And when you listen to others, some of them give you a version of that event that is far from the truth. Revisionist is someone who examines and tries to change existing beliefs about how events happen and what their importance or meaning is. I consider Nebuchadnezzar to be a revisionist. Some of you will tell me he's a deceiver. We'll come to that later on. But I want to suggest to you that Nebuchadnezzar got a vision that says, after your kingdom, there will be a next kingdom, then another kingdom, then another kingdom, then a final set of kingdoms that will kind of coexist. And then God will come at a stone. He will destroy all the kingdoms of earth and he will last forever. That was the facts. That was the things that happened. Nebuchadnezzar, that was the vision and the dream he got. He changed that by creating an image, revising. He's revisionist now. He's revising the stuff to make it look differently. Some you know, sometimes in church, I just as a small comment, I sometimes describe my basketball prowess, and some people say that is revisionism because how I played and what I talk about are two different things, right? So that's just another example. Some people who sing are also revisionists in that regard, right? So I got a wink from Denzel there. He understands that, right? So the fact is, Nebuchadnezzar was given one message, but he changed it, kept some of the facts in place. He still kept the goal. He still kept a tall image, but he made it into how he wanted. There's no one image to his God. It seemed to suggest he will last forever, and he forces people to worship it. Remember that. Remember that, because you're going to see plenty of examples of this in our society today. You see, sometimes when the Prime Minister goes up to speak in the press conference, he has to dispel and dispel revisionist views as well. Because sometimes he says, I want to tell you what really happened. Once he starts saying that, you know it's something different, right? So I'll tell you why that's important when we go along. So on closer examination of the story, I suggest there are two sides to this story. There's a God side and there's a Babylonian side. So let's examine that as we move forward. God reveals secrets and he deserves praise and worship. Nebuchadnezzar himself said that in Daniel chapter 2, verse 47. God revealed an image of a man statue. So I was saying that for those who told me I wasn't sure the statue is a man, I'm accepting. In Daniel chapter 2, it is a statue of a man. God reveals an image of a man statue made up of multiple metals. No dimensions is given of the man in the metallic statue. God didn't give him any dimension because this is God's vision. Nebuchadnezzar uses dimensions in his chapter to make his image because he wants to use Babylonian measurements, right? And then finally, God's vision said that the image he showed is destroyed by a rock and it becomes an everlasting kingdom. Not by any rock, but it is destroyed by the rock. And last week, you and I, when we looked at Corinthians and Matthew, etc., we knew that a rock is Christ Jesus, right? This is what is the flow. This is the facts. Let's see what the revisionist does. Plus, the other thing is to remember, I should have said that before I went on. Earthly kingdoms are temporary, but God's kingdom is forever, right? Look at what the revisionist does. Babylon revises what God reveals and demands worship. There is no evidence that the image is that of a man, but Babylon's image is all gold and with dimensions that reflect a sexagesimal base 60 numbering system, which is a Babylonian numbering system. I told you that the Babylonians use base 60 in their numbering, and we still have that today in 360 degrees in a circle, 60 seconds, 60 minutes in our time sequence, right? So this is not unknown or strange to us. But the fact is, he has revised what was said before. And then he basically is saying that Babylon's kingdom, in collaboration with Babylon's gods, will try to last forever. That is what is intended. So we were told in the vision that Daniel got in that Nebuchadnezzar got in chapter 2, that God's kingdoms are temporary. Earthly kingdoms are temporary, but God's kingdom is forever. In this case, we are hearing where Babylon is trying to make his kingdom last forever. This is extremely important. The other thing is to say, God's children choose to follow him. We know the various saying, by beholding we become changed. God doesn't force us to follow him. He reveals his love, and he says, choose ye this day who you will serve. Joshua said that. And then in Revelation 3:20, he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hears my voice and open the door and come in, I will sup with him and he with me. Right? God impresses us and then asks us to follow him because of our love for him, right? Following God, I want to suggest to you today, following God is a sober decision. If somebody says, I'm going to follow God and make Christ the Savior of my life, that's a sober decision we made, right? Somebody reminded me that land is also counted on a 60 basis, right? When you talk about acres and hectares and stuff, we're using 60. In Trinidad, we go back to hectares, but in the old days, we oftentimes use acres, which was a 60 purchase and all that kind of thing, right? Yeah, following God is a sober decision made from love for God and faith in him, despite how the believer feels. One with God is a majority. So I want to remind you that, right? That in following God, we don't count our feelings. If we follow God how we feel, then we're not following God. Because some days we don't feel to be a good Christian. But we follow God on conviction of our faith. That is the right thing to do. Christ, when he was on the cross, didn't follow his feelings. His feelings said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? His faith said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. So we have to understand that feelings and faith are two different things. Faith has nothing to do with how you feel. That's why I'm not a believer and a convert of feel-good religion. Some people tell me that when the church today, and boy, it felt good. Yeah, because that is transient. Tomorrow it mightn't feel so good. Will your faith be constant even though it doesn't feel good, right? God does not use or require any union between church and state to elicit worship from the believers. So God doesn't force us to believe him. And then the last thing to remember is that God is able to rescue and to save. I want us to always remember that. God is able to rescue and to save. What does Babylon say? God's children choose to follow him. Babylon demands, threatens worship and obedience. Following Babylon is a decision made from fear for one's own well-being and in harmony with the peer pressure and the cultural norms. So in that period on the plain of Dura, if you were following Babylon, you did it because you were concerned about your life. It seems to be the right thing to do because everybody else was doing it. So it's not a one with God in the majority. You're following the majority. And then the other thing is that Babylon used the union of church and state to come together and force worship. So he's saying, let's sing the music, carry on the parameters of worship. And if you don't worship, I will send you down into the fiery furnace because I have the power to do that, right? And then the important point to note is that Babylon gods cannot keep God's people down. I want us to remember, brethren, as we come into our close, that we have seen this before. In the Garden of Eden, we had a revisionist approach to what God said. So God said you should not eat of the tree because you will surely die. The serpent said unto the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that the day you eat, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So that spirit of revisionism, someone call it deception, but I like to use revisionism because it's taking a little bit of the truth and then mixing it up a little bit of something else and making it sound palatable. That ability to mix what God says to make it sound more popular and more easy to accept started in the Garden of Eden by Lucifer. It is prominent in the way Nebuchadnezzar behaves in Daniel chapter 3. And I want to suggest to you that it's not finished. It will happen towards the end of time as well. But we'll deal with that when we get to Revelation. It's important to know that faith overcomes. What was the secret of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Faith. Faith involves doing the right thing no matter the consequences. We show real faith when we pray to the God that we want, but trust Him for what we want, but we trust Him to do what is best for us, even when we don't understand it. And I challenge all of us to have this kind of faith. Challenge all of us. Do we have this kind of faith that allows us to really trust God, come what may? And I really hope that we could have that kind of faith where we will trust God in everything that He does for us, even when sometimes it doesn't work out the way we want to. You know, there are some Old Testament prophecies and prophets who testify of God's ability to protect and deliver. In Psalms 46:1, David was saying, God is my refuge and my strength, a very present help in times of trouble. The angel of the Lord encampeth around them that fear Him and deliver them. And then Isaiah, he had said, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. When you pass through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall thy flame kindle upon thee. Now bear in mind that God is too wise to make a mistake, and He has ultimate authority. These are not chips that you call in. These are not this is not ATM that you put in your card and punch and say, God, I want now to carry me through fire. Sometimes we will lose the battle on earth, but win the battle in heaven. Sometimes we may find ourselves in a situation where, as happened with the martyrs during the Dark Ages, we die. Sometimes we are overrun by cancer. Sometimes we are victims of hit and run. Sometimes we die as victims of earthquakes and natural disasters. Sometimes we contract COVID-19 and we die. That happens. But that doesn't change our faith. Because we believe the other part of Isaiah says, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee in the right hand of my righteousness. Before I go to my last slide, last few slides, let me just say that I know that some people, Ron in his comments and others before, made a heavy reference to the end of time. I've stayed away from that in this session because we will do Revelation later on. But I wanted to emphasize the qualities of Babylon in this session. And I wanted to emphasize that Babylon captures and converts, and that Babylon uses the popular music and cultural norms, lines up with a union between church and state, and then forces us to worship their God as opposed to the God of heaven. And then Babylon uses a numbering system that is unique to them, that I could say to you today is different from God's numbering system. So that their numbering system is based on 60. God's numbering system is based on 7. We have 7 days in a week. And that has never changed over all the various civilizations and histories. We've kept the 7-day week. But we can talk more about that in the future. The important point when we review this week's lesson is to remember that in the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar displayed the worst part of Babylon. And that is what Revelation builds upon when it uses Babylon to describe forces opposed to God's people in the last days. Because he's saying that in much the same way that Nebuchadnezzar demands worship and feels he can last forever, that thinking, even if those actual events will not occur, but that thinking will be resurrected towards the end of time. My final slide to you comes from a quote from the book Prophet and Kings, where it says, as in the days of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so in the closing periods of earth's history, the Lord will work mightily in behalf of those who stand steadfastly for the right. He who walked with the Hebrew worthies in the fiery furnace will be with his followers wherever they are. His abiding presence will comfort and sustain. In the midst of the time of trouble such as we have never seen since there was a nation, his chosen ones will stand unmoved. Satan with all the hosts of evil cannot destroy the weakest of God's saints. Angels that excel in strength will protect them. And in their behalf, Jehovah will reveal himself as a God of gods, able to save to the uttermost those who have put their trust in him. So I want to suggest to you today, brethren, that we have seen a story in Daniel that prepares us for the future. And if we pay attention to that, we will begin to realize that our God has a plan, and that his plan involves saving his people to the very end, so we can be citizens of his kingdom when he comes a second time. This is our end for today. Next week we'll go through a king's testimony. Somebody has a question or comment? Tony? Is that Lady or Ronaldo?
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, you know.
Okay. In relation to Nebuchadnezzar not knowing God, or is it that he chose to serve other gods? And I am asking that question based on Jeremiah chapter 40, verses 1 to 6, where even his God was able to tell Jeremiah on releasing him why it is they were taken captive and brought to Babylon.
Yeah, so again, you hit the nail on the head, right? So the thing is to remember that Nebuchadnezzar is making choices here. He is not, this is not predestination. And I keep going back to that, right? Nebuchadnezzar is making a very deliberate choice to change the way in which God's message was presented to him in chapter 2 and do something else. And why is that? Well, he is motivated by this desire to have his kingdom last forever. And he sees the prophecies of the God of Daniel as in stark contradiction to his aspiration. So if the prophecies of God are different to his aspiration, and his aspiration is to be in charge and to be the one who will last forever, then he has to revise. As I use that term, revisionist. He has to revise, come up with a different way of working that will either force people to worship him or let them choose if they wish. But if they don't choose, then he'll force them. But all through this, Nebuchadnezzar is making a choice. This is not foreordained by God. He has chosen to move away from what God has said to do his own thing. When we do next week's session, we'll see that even when, at the height of his hubris and his pride, he believes that he's the one in charge of everything, God still visits him and says, hey, I am in charge. Go and become a madman for 7 years. So clearly there is an attempt by God to try to ensure that that Nebuchadnezzar is saved from his own decisions. But at the end of the day, the bigger message here is that notwithstanding the attempts by a powerful nation as Babylon to force people to believe different from the God of heaven, God protects his people even through times of fire. All right? I saw one final question where somebody was asking about where was Daniel, and we had answered that before. Ron gave us a very good explanation around that. That kind of says that he felt that Daniel was kept out deliberately from these proceedings, almost as if to allow him not to have to make that choice or decision. But clearly, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood in his stead and had to make the decision themselves. All right, so somebody's asking again, so I refrain from calling names, right, as much as I can. So somebody's saying on YouTube, in the light of what we have studied, what should be the narrative we share with our children, knowing what is to be before us? So I would say, certainly when you talk to your children, you want to give them this story of deliverance, Because this story in its purest sense is a story of deliverance, but it's also a story of people standing up to what God believed and what they believe in God, right? So if it is people believe in God and they remain steadfast to God, God will see them through. And I keep emphasizing that this is not a movie. Sometimes he stab or he does dead. So some days things may not work out the way we want, but that don't mean we need to turn our back on God. We remain very faithful. So our children need to know that God is a deliverer, but he's also one who expects us to remain faithful to him throughout the length and breadth of Earth's history. All right, so I want to stop the share, and we're about to close off if we can. And I trust that everything was in accordance to God's will for all of us today, and that we really understood what has been said and what God is expecting of each and every one of us. If there are no other questions, anybody has any other questions? I saw a reference to Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, which is around the time of trouble, and what will happen around that time. And yes, we will pick that up when we get to that chapter. But for now, I don't want to lay too much on us. I know some of us, because we know what is ahead in the other parts of the chapters, we want to link it up. But when we get to those chapters, we'll come back to this. Once we understand that the key point here is that here is a king who has made a decision to revise what God said and do his own thing. I think that is a key message, and that he forces people to worship him rather than worship what God wants us to do. All right, so if there are no more questions, then I want to close off. Remember, what we do is that I will upload this video back onto YouTube. So if during the week you wish to go through anything, you can. And then next Sabbath, we will look at Daniel chapter 4, and Daniel chapter 5 come next. Daniel chapter 5 is another interesting one just like this, that I think has a lot of detail, beliefs, and value for us beyond where we are at this point in time. I will just offer a final word of prayer as we close off. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the deep messages you have given to us in the book of Daniel. We believe that you are speaking to us and drawing us ever closer to you. Guide us and direct us, we pray. And as we study, reveal your will to our hearts, and may that be a revelation of your will lead us to decisions, sober, permanent convictions to serve you in spirit and in truth. Guide and protect us is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all, and I hope you had a good morning this morning. I want to thank Pastor Roy for his message this morning, which is similar to this, which is about faith and keeping trust in God. And we meet again next Sabbath at the same time.